When you look at the magnificent Swiss Alps, they're absolutely breathtaking, right? But for centuries, those very same mountains stood as this colossal, immovable antagonist to human connection. So, what exactly happens when an unstoppable force of human ingenuity meets an unmovable mountain range? Well, we don't go over it. We go right through it. Today in this explainer, we're diving into one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements. This is a project where we quite literally conquered the mountains through sheer determination, cutting-edge technology, and decades of really hard work. Okay, let's dive into this and set the scale with one massive number. 57.1. That's the length, in kilometers, of the Gotthard Base Tunnel. Stretching longer than a marathon, it officially holds the title as the longest railway tunnel ever built. And the craziest part? This entire massive structure isn't out in the open. It's hidden incredibly deep beneath the towering mountains of Europe, slicing straight through the heart of the Swiss Alps. Which naturally brings up a pretty mind-boggling question. How do you actually dig through the Alps? Seriously, how on earth do you carve a path through millions of tons of solid, unyielding rock? This isn't just your standard construction project. It's a high-stakes hero's journey. It's the story of engineers facing down impossible odds, battling the immense forces of nature, and fundamentally transforming modern transportation in the process. But to really grasp the magnitude of this achievement, we first have to understand the problem they were trying to solve in the first place. And that brings us to the Great Alpine Barrier. Now, what's really interesting about this is that for centuries, this massive mountain range completely blocked the flow of trade. If travelers wanted to cross, they were forced into these incredibly hazardous mountain passes, fighting heavy snow and just brutal weather. But as modern European trade skyrocketed, those existing routes hit a wall, literally. They were entirely dependent on the seasons, and they were hitting their absolute limits. So engineers dreamed up a radical alternative. Instead of climbing over the mountains, they'd carve a completely flat, high-speed, weatherproof transit route straight through the base, making the journey faster, safer, and infinitely more efficient. Which leads us to the monumental task of actually boring through the mountain. Because dreaming up a flat tunnel is one thing, but actually building it is a whole different beast. Breaking ground back in 1999, they hit the midpoint of this intense, grueling excavation around 2008, and it actually took until 2016 to complete the whole thing. That is 17 years. Think about it, a kid born on day one of this project would be graduating high school by the time the first train finally ran. It required thousands of people dedicating their daily lives to this single monumental route. And to truly grasp the astonishing scale of what they accomplished over those 17 years, just look at this number, 28 million. That's the exact number of tons of solid rock that had to be removed. And to get this done, they obviously weren't just out there with pickaxes. They brought in these massive tunnel boring machines. I want you to picture pieces of machinery as large as multi-story buildings, operating day and night, literally chewing their way through the solid rock of the Alps. It's almost hard to wrap your head around. But the digging was really only part of the story. They also had to survive the deep. At certain points during the excavation, workers were digging up to 2,000 meters directly beneath the surface of the mountain. Just think about that for a second. That is 2 kilometers of solid, heavy mountain pushing down on you from above. This created immense, life-threatening pressure from the surrounding rock. It was an environment that was frankly incredibly hostile to human life. So the sheer volume of rock was really only half the battle. Down there, the environment actively wants you gone. Crews battled sweltering extreme temperatures, violent blasts of high water pressure, dangerous rock pressure, and shifting geology that constantly threatened to collapse the workspace. Under 2 kilometers of rock, one single mistake is fatal. Every single meter they moved forward required absolute precision. Let's see how this builds, because to survive this deeply hostile environment, engineers really had to get creative. First, they deployed these massive advanced ventilation systems just to make the air breathable. Second, they rigged up sophisticated sensors to constantly monitor for microscopic rock movements. Third, and this is wild, because they were digging from opposite ends to meet in the middle, they used precision multi-directional surveying. They landed with astonishing pinpoint accuracy when the massive tunnel sections finally broke through. And fourth, they built dedicated emergency stations directly inside the tunnel to ensure long-term passenger safety. And all of that risk and innovation paid off by breaking some massive world records.
After a grueling 17-year battle against the mountain, human ingenuity claimed a truly historic victory. The Gotthard Base Tunnel blasted past Japan's incredible 53.8-kilometer Seikon Tunnel. Coming in at 57.1 kilometers, it officially crowned itself the undisputed longest and deepest railway tunnel on Earth, fundamentally transforming European transportation forever.
But, it's not just about length. It's about the sheer power and efficiency of the completed project. 250. That is the incredible speed, in kilometers per hour, that passenger trains can now reach while traveling directly through the Alps. The tunnel has dramatically reduced travel times across Switzerland, making journeys far faster and just so much more comfortable for millions of passengers. And beyond just speed, this brings us to a greener transport future. So, the crucial point here is that this massive dirt and grit engineering project is actually a huge win for nature. By slashing travel times, it actively encourages freight companies to shift heavy cargo off of trucks and onto high-speed trains. This empties out those winding alpine roads, which massively cuts down on carbon emissions and air pollution, ultimately protecting the incredibly fragile mountain ecosystem. It is just a perfect demonstration of how a major economic infrastructure project can actually go hand in hand with vital environmental protection. And this brilliantly illustrates a much bigger picture. When you look at the decades of planning, the millions of tons of rock moved, and just the sheer grit required to pull this off, it becomes so clear. As the quote goes, the world's longest tunnel is not just a tunnel, it is a monument to what humanity can accomplish. It truly stands as a supreme symbol of innovation, cooperation, and human ambition. We've seen how the so-called immovable alpine wall was conquered by determination and cutting-edge technology. Millions of passengers and vast amounts of cargo now glide effortlessly beneath the mountains every single year. So it leaves us with this final thought to ponder. As nations continue to dream up and build even larger, more advanced mega projects, what other immovable barriers will human ingenuity conquer next? Thank you for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.